So we're going to tackle America and World War II. And we're not going to be able to do that without, just like in World War One, looking into the causes of World War II and all of that. So the interwar era, the beginnings of World War II from 1920 to 1939 is our first section. And sometimes people call this the Good War because we had a clear enemy with the Nazis, with Hitler. And there was really not a lot of argument when the world learned what was going on in Germany. There wasn't really a lot of argument for, well, we need to stay out of this war. So anyway, that's where we're going to start. We're going to talk about what caused World War II and all of that. First, we'll look at what was going on in Germany and the rise of Hitler, because that's vital to understanding World War II. So remember, there were four empires that fell in World War I, and one of those was the German Empire that had actually been created in 1871 when Germany was unified. But Germany lost World War I, so the Kaiser, or the Emperor, William II, took off, went to Holland, and there was no government. So we have to have a government. We create one that comes to be called the Weimar Republic. Now, it is indeed a republic. It has representatives. It has representation, in the form of parliament, the same way that we have a Congress. That is very similar. You also are going to have in the Weimar Republic an elected president, and you're going to have a chancellor or a prime minister who does a lot of the day-to-day work. But the Kaiser left, and then a new government was created, and they were trying at this point a republic. The Weimar Republic is a spectacular failure for a lot of reasons. One thing, they have a huge debt from World War I. They have a $33 billion debt that they can't pay. And what happens is sometimes they default on their payments, and we end up with this hyperinflation. Okay, so they're printing more money, but the money is not worth as much. So look at the top, you have Zehn Billionen, okay, 10 billion. That's worth 10 billion Deutsche Marks, or let's just say $10 billion, right? You see that the guys there in that picture burning the money because it's cheaper than actually running, a furnace or whatever. Look over here on the right. You can look at this, the cost of a loaf of bread in Berlin, and you can see exactly how bad this inflation is. So in 1918, at the end of World War I, if it cost you, and I'm going to say dollars instead of marks, okay? Because that might, since we use dollars, it might be more, maybe a little easier for us to understand. I don't know. So I think it is. 1918, let's say it cost 63 cents to get a loaf of bread in Berlin. Okay, by 1922, you see it was $163.15. Yikes. January 23, it was $250. July, $3,465 for a loaf of bread. Okay, look at this. September 1923, $1,512,000 for a loaf of bread, and then look at the bottom. I mean, this is crazy. Crazy by November 1923. You're only looking at a loaf of bread. Imagine what it would cost to try to buy a new pair of shoes. Imagine what it would cost for you to try to buy. I mean, just literally think of anything. So you're just using bread here as a marker. So they're in what's called, again, hyperinflation. Slide 5 shows on the left some kids playing with blocks of money because it's cheaper than buying kids' toys. And then on the right, we have someone else burning the money for fuel. Meanwhile, over in Germany, you've got Adolf Hitler. Now, he had been arrested he and his group, of Nazis, They were attempting to take over the Bavarian government. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He only served 9 or 10 months in prison. But while he's in prison, he writes the first volume of Mein Kampf. He's um, dictating it to one of his guys. And he's allowed to have a secretary. I mean, he's in a place called Landsberg Prison. He's treated very well. He comes out of prison. He's got this book, and he's very very well known. I mean, wow. Okay, what an introduction to the world. So anyway, he calls it Mein Kampf, which means my struggle or my battle. Now he turns people into really just into things. And he bases it on physical appearance and higher and lower orders and so on. Now, according to Hitler, the Germanic man and woman with the fair hair, blonde hair, or fair skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes is at the top of everything. So then there's people that say, well, why did he say that? Because he's not even like that. Look at him. He doesn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. And I'm like, all right, look, that is a fundamental misunderstanding, because Adolf Hitler, when he talks about it, when the Nazis talk about Aryan, okay, they're talking about white people, basically Caucasian people with no Jewish blood, no Slavic blood. That's some of the Eastern European countries. It's ethnic group. No, what did I say? No Asian blood, no African blood. None of the different ethnicities. He's talking about Caucasians. So you don't have to have blonde hair and blue eyes. What he's saying is that's the best of the best, right? He called these people Uber mention. Think of the word Uber like, Ubers. Catch a ride on an Uber, ride sharing and all that. It's spelled the same, Uber mention, and then Menschen. So if you look on there, down at the bottom, the last paragraph on that slide says, so it follows in Hitler's thinking, if there's a supreme form of human, the Aryan, right, the Übermenschen, which translates to overman or superman, then there's got to be inferiors. And this he calls the Untermenschen, okay? Basically, they're underman, they're lower than man. They're in his case here, he's saying they're racially inferior. Now, again, Jews get the most notice because of the Holocaust. Other peoples, though, were considered to be less than, including, I mentioned, the Slavs. Slavs, part of the Slavic peoples, I mean, we have the Czechs, the Poles, Russians, and so on. But also, as I mentioned, people with African, Asian, what else? Slavic, and what you could still be white for all intents and purposes if you're Slav. But anyway, he has all of these weird racial ideas, and he thinks that it's up to him to determine who is superior. So while Hitler has become Chancellor of Germany in 1933, we're going to see the United States sitting over here wondering what's all happening over in Europe. Well, we don't want another war. We really don't want another war. So before anything has really happened with Hitler, as in, invading other countries or whatever, America is going to put into effect the Neutrality Acts. Now, in 1935, it is notable to mention that the Nazis have removed German Jews' citizenships. It's called the Nuremberg Laws. That happened in 1935. At the same time, we're putting into effect our Neutrality Acts, but we don't want to go to another European war. So in 1935, we established a mandatory arms embargo, okay? So against both the victim and the aggressor, whatever side you are in the military conflict of any sort, we are not going to give you any arms. We're not going to help you. Now, it also empowers the president to warn United States citizens that, if you travel on ships of warring nations, that is at your own risk. Now, why do they put that in there? Well, if you're a United States citizen and of your own volition, you go and you get on a ship of a country that's at war with another country and you get killed, then they don't want the United States to be expected to follow through with an international incident because of you being, you know, not smart enough to avoid traveling on ships of nations that are at war. So that's part of the reason for that, and it makes perfect sense if you think about it. So 1936, we renew the Neutrality Act. 1937, things were starting to get a little bit different over in Europe. We have other signs that something's not quite right in Germany. We have word coming back to us, and other conditions we're keeping an eye on, but Congress starts to get a little bit more concerned that we might end up in a European war. Okay, now what we establish here is called the cash and carry policy. So if you're fighting a war, if you're a country fighting a war, then you can purchase from the United States, but it cannot be arms. It cannot be anything to aid you in the war. You can purchase from us non-military goods, but you also have to pay us right then, and you have to take the goods away on your own vessels. Cash and carry. You pay us right now, you carry them away. Okay, that's a pretty good idea, but are we going to hold to that? Well, the answer is no, but that's a preview of coming attractions. Remember, the President of the United States, who had been elected first in 1932, is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So in 1939, Germany invades Poland, September 1st, 1939. That's usually considered to be the official act of war that we generally trace and say, okay, this is the beginning of World War One or World War II, I'm sorry. So that happened in September of 1939. Germany invades Poland. Poland has fallen to Germany by October of 1939. And our election in the United States was in, of course, November, as it always is for president. So the election is behind FDR, and he, just like Woodrow Wilson before him in World War I, FDR actually has great sympathy for Great Britain. I mean, again, they're a lot like us, and the Allies and so on. He's going to have a lot of empathy and very little neutrality. So to the public, what he says is, we're continuing what we've already established. We're helping the Allies. But in truth, he was doing some more. He was doing a little bit more than what was allowed with cash and carry, and it gets worse by December of 1940, when it turns out that Great Britain is bankrupt, and the Prime Minister asked the United States, for help. Look, we don't have the money. We cannot continue this war. Britain is going to fall to the Nazis if you don't help us. Because you see, Great Britain, as they're bankrupt, they can't meet the cash and carry requirements. But as I said, the Prime Minister, this happens to be one of the great diplomats, one of the great spokesmen, orators, and just a very interesting historical character, Winston Churchill. Prime Minister says, look, we've got to have help from the United States. So FDR says, okay, what we can do is we can help you out by eliminating the money from look at this, arms transactions. Oh, ouch. Okay, he's not even pretending to only sell non-military goods to the Allies. He's not even pretending. Okay, we're going to eliminate the money, the dollar sign, from the transactions. of arms. Now, basically, what he's trying to do in some ways is to keep the people who are really outspokenly against war. Okay, they're completely against war. There, there's going to be some in all places at this time. Okay, we're still not to the point where we're forced into this war. But there were a lot of people that said, no, we're not going to send our boys over to fight another European war. We're not going to do it. So he's trying to kind of keep them at bay a little bit because we're not intervening with troops, right? So, it's a matter of semantics in some ways, right? Because we're on the way right there. So the Lend-Lease program is what comes of this. The Lend-Lease program completely destroys, any even pretension of neutrality, okay? So our government could not only sell, but they could also loan, lend or lease arms to any nation that is deemed vital to the defense of the United States. Now, who determines what is vital to the defense of the United States? Well, president and Congress and whatever. Okay, so that's kind of circular logic. If we want to lend or lease something to a country, all we have to do is say, well, it's vital to the defense of the United States. And okay. So, second bullet point, in other words, we can send weapons to Great Britain, and all they have to do is promise to return them or pay for them when the war is over. Wow, that's quite a jump, right? From neutrality. So the isolationists, the people who, again, are totally against the war, especially a war from European causes, okay, sending people over to Europe to die, they're going to stand firm. They're going to say, look, no, we can't allow this to pass. And you know what? Congress disagrees. Congress believes that we should help Great Britain because, again, the idea is, well, if we don't help Great Britain, the Nazis are going to take over. And maybe not just Great Britain, maybe they're going to take over the continent of Europe. So Congress passes the Lend-Lease bill. So the Weimar government in Germany has a president. His name was von Hindenburg, and he was a World War I hero, I guess. I mean, he was high ranking, and anyway, he had been elected president twice. Now, turns out in 1933, he appoints Hitler, Adolf Hitler, as his chancellor. That's like the prime minister. It's the one that does a lot of the day-to-day work of the government, of running the government. And the Nazis, the reason that he asked Hitler to come join the government and become chancellor was because the Nazis were getting more and more powerful. And Hindenburg is pressured in many ways into putting a Nazi into that particular position. See, generally speaking, if you were going to be chancellor, your party, your political party, needed to have a majority in the Reichstag, in the parliament. Well, the Nazis are not exactly going to have a majority, but they do have more members in parliament than other parties. Now, to be fair, there were a lot of political parties there. But once, 1933 and Hitler comes in, they're going to pretty quickly get rid of all other parties except for the Nazi party. So that's a bad sign as they start to move in that direction. And it's going to get constantly worse as the Nazis take over more and more of the German people's lives. Their lives are going to be completely changed, at least most of them. There's a book I read a long time ago when I was in graduate school, when I first started, I guess. It was called Hitler's Willing Executioners. And it talked about how a lot of the Germans who lived somewhere near some of the death camps, at a certain point in time, they had to smell the crematoriums. When they would ride their bikes by these places, wherever, and they were going to work, they had to know what was going on with some of their neighbors. And the question is, what could they do? What could anybody do with the forces of the Nazis taking over this country and with a special hatred for Jews? But remember, it's not just Jews. It's all the others with different kinds of blood, and it's also homosexuals. It's also Romani. This is another ethnic group that sometimes they're referred to as gypsies. So many different people, many different kinds of people are going to be massacred in what becomes known eventually as the Holocaust. 1935. This is a time when something really big happens in Germany that shows things are not going to get better. 1935, we have the Nuremberg laws passed, and this removed the German Jews of their rights as citizens. You have to be an Aryan to run for public office, to serve in public office, to vote. Okay. And marriage between an Aryan and a Jew is going to become forbidden. They're also going to limit the types of jobs that Jews can have. And it's again, this idea here of hatred specifically for the Jews, even more so than others. It's going to really start taking shape by this point, because I'll tell you what is going on from 1933 up until about 1939, when Germany invades Poland, is the Germans want to run the Jews out of Germany. Okay, they want to make it uncomfortable. They want to make it known to the Jews that they're not welcome. But that doesn't work. A lot of Jews don't leave. And again, why should you leave? Why should you have to leave? It's your family. Maybe your family's had this property for generations or something. I mean, it's just it's a ridiculous notion that they're trying to literally just push out all these people from their country just for racist, as they would say, ideas. Race, they're calling the Jews a race. And they're calling Aryans a race, and there's all sorts of things wrong with that. But anyway, what's happening though is the people in Germany who are paying attention know it's going to get worse. But some of them just have no way of getting out. Some of them, think about how difficult it would be today if something happened in the United States and whatever, think of whatever group that you belong to that someone might hate, and they wanted to force you out of the country. How easy would it be to just pick up and go to another country? Well, the answer is not that easy. Okay, so a lot of Jews ended up staying, and a lot of them had no choice. This is a famous picture taken the morning after what's called the Kristallnacht. Okay, let me see. Yeah, there it is. It's spelled down at the bottom of the PowerPoint, Kristallnacht. That's translated, it can be translated literally crystal night, or usually it's the night of broken glass. And what happened was on the night of December 9th of 1938, there had been an assassination of a German official in Paris, in the Paris, the German embassy in Paris. It was a young Jewish boy who killed this German ambassador, and the young boy was in college in Paris, and he had gotten a message from his family who had been deported from Germany. And the Germans were, by that point, by 1938, they're trying to deport the the Jews out of the country. Then hey, they're not leaving. Let's force them out. So a lot of Polish Jews had been deported, and then Poland doesn't want them. So a lot of times they're stuck in these refugee camp sort of things. So this one young boy got a message from his family, and they told him what happened. They're like, look, here we are. We're stuck over here. Please help us. He didn't know what to do. He was 17. He took a gun, sadly, took a gun and went to the German embassy in Paris and, assassinated one of the ambassadors. Now, the word comes back to the Germans, and the Nazis really spin this into something. They say, we're not going to react as the government. We're not going to react to this terrible act that this Jew has taken. But if there are spontaneous eruptions of violence, we're going to ignore them. Now, paraphrase that, but that's pretty much what they said. Okay, in other words, they were saying we're not gonna sanction it by the state, by the government. But if you guys want to go out and teach the Jews a lesson, we're not going to arrest you. We're not going to prosecute you. So we have the Night of Broken Glass, where you have synagogues destroyed. That's the places of worship. You have a lot of the Jewish businesses destroyed. There's, these guys are looking in the window of what used to be the window of a Jewish business. And if you look down past that guy, the second one on the, he's the second one from the right side of the screen, the one who's furthest down the street, you can see, looks like a reflection of the Nazi flag, or it looks backwards to me. I don't know, maybe it's just a Nazi flag hanging there. I don't know. But anyway, they have, during that night of November 9th, the night before this, they had what are called pogroms, Pogroms, and those are going to be revolts against, it's a word that is specifically violence that is aimed at ethnic groups. And a lot of times you're going to see throughout history, it's going to be aimed at Jews a lot of the time. So these pogroms ended up with many deaths. We had so many of the Jews who were murdered that particular night, and so many of them lost everything. And it's just a shame that the people of Germany actually did that. They knew that they were going to get away with it, and it shows the power of propaganda. I mean, there were a lot of synagogues burned in full view of the public, in full view of firefighters. Now, the firefighters had been told, don't put out the fire of anything, any of the Jewish property, unless it's going to spread to somebody else's property, somebody who's a non-Jew, right, an Aryan. So they're even going to go in and destroy some of the Jewish cemeteries. It's just horrible. You're going to have 30,000 Jews arrested that night and put into concentration camps, and about 91 to 100 are killed that night. Now, once they get in the concentration camps, they think that about another 1,000, maybe 2,000, died directly in the concentration camps from things that happened to them during the Kristallnacht. So again, this is a huge turning point. And here we just have some pictures. You've got the Star of David up there in the top left. It says Judah, which is Jew. You've got some soldiers beating up on an old man, Jewish man. You've got the little kids down there in the bottom having to wear the Star of David. You were required, if you were Jewish, you were required to wear the Star of David, the yellow star. You were required to wear that in a place where people could see it on your clothing. And again, they thought of you as subhuman, underhuman, underman. So anyway, this all of the Holocaust stuff always bothers me. I had a professor one time. She showed us a video, and it was called Night and Fog, if you're interested in it. And it's not available very often with an English translation, but it is available pretty often on YouTube with French. If you can speak French, you can understand it. But I've been able to find some that has been some versions of it that have been dubbed in English or subtitled in English. But anyway, it's called Night and Fog. And my professor, Dr. Allen, she told us after she showed that video to us one night, she said that it's time to take a break. And she said every time, no matter how many years she showed that video, she still had to take a break and recover after watching it because it's so horrible. So again, it's called Night and Fog. It's about 29 minutes long. If anybody, hey, there you go. If you can find that, I don't know if you can, but if you can find it, if you want to send in something about it for extra credit, it's pretty, it's pretty moving. But my point for mentioning that is every time I teach about the Holocaust, it's still just as disturbing as it was the first time. Let me put it that way. And sometimes I know, I get kind of emotional when talking about this, even after all these years. So now I finally understand Dr. Allen. To understand World War II, you can't just look at Hitler and the Nazis, although that's what most people are tempted to do. You also have to look at the fascists in Italy. So let's talk just for a minute about the rise of the fascist party in Italy, because remember, fascism can mean something very specific. It can mean an authoritarian government and a government, that controls the people through oppressive means and censorship and takes away freedoms and all that kind of stuff. Well, Mussolini's fascist party is something different. It's actually a party that is started in Italy that grows, but not ever quite to the extent that the Nazi party grows over in Germany. So we have to talk a little bit about that because Italy is one of the belligerents in World War II. And Italy is going to do the same thing it did in the First World War, pretty much. It's going to change sides again. So there's that. So we have Benito Mussolini, who was sometimes called Il Duce, I-L, and capital D-U-C-E, if you're interested. But anyway, he was an editor of a socialist newspaper and a strong nationalist. Now remember, nationalism is a very extreme version of patriotism. I'm trying to wait and see if my dog is going to stop barking so I can continue. But anyway, and his socialism is not Marxist, okay? Because in Marxism, remember, the decisions, the control lies in the hands of the workers, the proletariat. So with Benito Mussolini's socialism, he's going to actually have the decisions being made by the top people and the corporations and all that. So it's very much what Hitler's doing over in Germany. Hitler and the Nazis, I mean, the name of the Nazis is actually the National Democratic Socialist Workers Party, I think is what the Nazis, that translates into in English. But, they threw in socialism and all, and they threw in the word workers in Nazism to make people think it was something very different, like, down to the people, when it was really Hitler and his few really important high-ranking guys that were in control. So fascism over in Italy is very much like this. Now, 1919, he brings together his version of socialism and again his extreme nationalism. Remember, again, rabid patriotism. My country, right or wrong, no matter what my leader does, I've got to stand behind my country and back them 100%. That's dangerous. It's one of the causes of World War I. Okay. Now, the Fascist Party, just like the Nazis for that matter, really disliked Marxist socialism, really anti Marxist socialism and anti communism. Now, Karl Marx had said that when socialism evolved, it would become something called communism. So basically, that makes sense. So anyway, this is the leader of Italy. He's going to be in power really from 1923 until I guess 1945 or 43 actually. But anyway, Mussolini, you need to know who he is and you need to kind of understand what the fascist party is, the socialism from the top down and extreme nationalism. So we've got Germany, we've got Italy, and now Japan. So I just have on there, would you die for the emperor? Right? Are you willing to die for the emperor? Well, it's because he was considered to be a godlike figure. And that was something cultural. It was something deep in their culture at that time. So if this were European history class, we would talk a lot more about Emperor Hirohito. But for now, all you need to know is that he is the emperor. He became emperor really young. He was about 25, I think. And Japan had fought a war against China from 31 to 32, and then they invaded Manchuria. Now, the emperor had been raised to believe that emperors were above politics. So he had been taught all of his life pretty much to listen to his advisors. So he's going to have a different mindset than a lot of leaders. And the interesting thing too about him, besides the fact that the Japanese people believe he was divine, a godlike figure, but another thing that's interesting is after World War II is over, he is allowed to continue as emperor. And he does not die until 1989, which I think is really interesting. I was in college in 1989, and I do not know what I was doing because I would have had that on my radar if I had been paying attention to anything in the world because this was such a, massive historical figure. So anyway, just kind of understand who Hirohito is and his importance. So by 1939, there's going to be a war. Okay, there's going to be a war. We have these three dictators. We have Mussolini on the left, Hirohito in the middle, and then Adolf Hitler on the right. So let's see what's going on here with World War II. Brief overview here of World War II. This is going to be much worse than World War I, the war that was supposed to end all wars. But we're going to have 55 million and more dead. We don't ever really think we've got the accurate count. Okay? For one thing, Germany doesn't report necessarily all completely truthfully and other reasons. But this is the first time in history that the majority of the dead are civilians, not soldiers. Why is that? Well, it's because we have saturation bombings of cities. They're bombing supposedly for political and industrial targets, but if they hit, some family homes, then so be it. You're also going to have widespread starvation because World War II is being fought on boots on the ground on the continent of Europe much of the time. So you've got people losing their homes and their crops and just everything that goes with a war right there on your home front. So there's homeless people, there's people that are starving. And then, of course, the genocide, the Holocaust, the mass extermination of the Jews and all these other different groups. Now, the war's fought On just about every continent except the Americas. There's going to be the Pacific theater, there's going to be the European theater, there's going to be the African theater, there's going to be a lot of different places that the war is going to be fought, and it does begin and end at different times for different countries. I mean, United States, we don't come in until December 8th, 1941, the day after the Pearl Harbor attack. And Italy is going to do its thing. Like I said, it's going to change, and they're not going to come in on the side of the Allies until much later, and just all sorts of things that happen. For example, we defeat Europe, or Germany in particular. We defeat Germany first, and then it's going to take quite a while longer for us to defeat Japan. So again, beginning and ending at different times for different countries. We'll talk about the war to some degree in three phases. And the first phase goes from 1939 to 1942. This is the triumph of the Axis powers. So we had the Central Powers in World War I. Now we've got the Axis powers. Where does that come from? And where did Japan come from in all of this? So now remember, Japan was on the side of the Allies in the First World War. They weren't one of the biggest players, and they weren't really committing a lot of troops. But okay, so the term Axis comes from an agreement, this pledge of cooperation. It's called the Rome, Berlin, and Tokyo Axis. Okay, it's a pledge of cooperation between these three nations. They're allied with each other. They are working together, and so on. So once the war starts, these three are going to be known collectively as the Axis powers. Okay. Now, we always have to have a spark that sets off something. We talked about World War I, and I said, look, don't get confused. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was not the cause of World War I. It was the result of a lot of other things that had been simmering, because the death of such an insignificant figure really on the world stage shouldn't have set off that series of events that took us into World War I. So that's what I call the spark of World War I, was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. I think the spark of World War II is when Germany invaded Poland. Okay, Hitler had already said the Germans need living space. And so 1939, they take off and they invade Poland. Okay, so what's going on in Europe then? Well, we've got the Germans invading Poland. Like I said, September 1st, 1939. September 3rd, England and France declare war on Germany because of a treaty with Poland. And by October, Poland has fallen. Now, the Gestapo, which means the Nazi secret police, are going to start doing some rounding up of Polish enemies. Now, who would be enemies? Well, anyone who would question the Nazis and why they're doing what they're doing, and cause any kind of problems for them. Anyone who would ask questions, again, so that's going to include smart people of all sorts. It's going to include also that they political prisoners and so on, or political opponents. Also, though, you're going to have the Nazis saying that they really didn't like strong, rabid Christians, right? I don't remember what word they used. I want to say it was rabid, but they really didn't want to allow very strong Christians to have a lot of say. So they start rounding up all of these Polish enemies once they've got Poland, once they're occupying Poland. And the picture that you see that I've got on this PowerPoint was Heinrich Himmler, and he was going to be the leader of the SS, which is basically the military part of the Nazi party. And he's going to be the assistant. He was, I think, at one time the leader, but he's going to be the assistant at some point of the leader of the Gestapo. So the Gestapo is pretty terrifying, because the Gestapo has the ability to arrest you and hold you, and they just kept you as long as they wanted to. Now, it's kind of terrifying because there's no chance that they're going to get out, that you're going to get out if you're arrested. And it could be for anything, it could be for nothing. I mean, they literally had carte blanche. They could do anything they wanted to. Okay, because Himmler is only going to report to Hitler. So yeah, that's a terrifying thing that's going on. Well, we're going to have by June of 1940 France surrendering, as you have Hitler attacking from the north, and you have his ally Benito Mussolini's Italy attacking from the south, and now France is going to surrender. And you call the puppet government that is put in by the Nazis the Vichy government. The guy who is, quote, running it, end quote, which means he's not running it at all. The Nazis are running it. He's just put in there as a puppet, a figurehead. But this guy is Philippe Pétain. He was a World War I French hero, right? So he's working for the Nazis now. He's really a figurehead. And you notice that cartoon there. I really like those. I love the topical ones that really have a lot of content historically that makes sense and shows where the people were at that moment of time, what they were thinking. So you've got this old guy in the wheelchair with his blanket and his sword saving France. And then look who's pushing the wheelchair. It's a Nazi. So for Germany. So again, you're going to have a free France movement that starts from Great Britain and from some of the French colonies. You're going to have a guy named Charles de Gaulle who's going to be head of the Free French movement. But yeah, I mean, you've got the Vichy government, which is a Nazi-run government in France. Here's another good comic. This one's illustrating the surrender of France, and you've got Hitler on one side, Mussolini on the other side. Again, like I said, they attacked from the north and the south. And then there's France represented by the woman signing the armistice or the ceasefire. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop part one right here at 26 slides. And then, because I have, I think, 63 slides in this presentation. So I'm going to be doing part two as soon as possible, but I wanted you to go ahead and be able to start and have something, have some material. So we're going to stop it right now. I'm going to try to get it uploaded as quickly as possible. Hopefully it will be uploaded no later than Friday evening, hopefully, technology willing. And then watch for the second part of this.